Guys, it's just kitten videos. What a way to introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. You're all probably tired because it's like the third day and I'm the last time slot before the lock note. So it's fine. You can nap. But also, I'm really loud and kind of like, so you might not be able to, and I'm sorry if that happens. I won't be offended if you walk out. My name is Jo. I'm from Perth, Western Australia. This is my first time at NDC. Thank you for having me. It's my hecklers over here. Don't worry, I've got a slide for you at the end. I thought just to get an idea, because this is a topic that isn't covered a huge amount at NDC, I just wanted to get an idea of who's actually in the audience. So is there anyone who works in sort of the design space? Hey, you guys make things look pretty. Excellent. All right, what about our user experience people? So mainly sort of working with the interfaces. Excellent. I'm seeing some crossover already. This is a spectrum. You can leave your hand up until it no longer applies if you want. So the next one is development, and I'm expecting most of you, because it's a development conference, I'm shocked. Truly shooken. What about QA? Excellent. One person that wooed. Yes, I love the enthusiasm. Good on you. Anything that I haven't already covered and you didn't fit into any of those other boxes, shout it out. No? Okay. I got mostly covered everyone, or you're too shy, or you're already asleep. I'm not sure which one it is, but that's okay. So I, at some point in time, have fit into most of these categories and a bunch that aren't on here. And I thought I would start out by telling you a little bit about my background. And I know you're not here to actually learn about me, but I promise you that it does eventually become relevant. My husband likes to say that my stories take a really long time and sometimes the punchline is worth it. He's here, so you can tell him at the end if you think that that is accurate. But this is where I come from. It's a place called Perth, Western Australia. Well, this is actually not in Perth. It's a bit out of Perth. And it's basically just a giant desert. So to give you a little bit of an idea how Perth compares, or how Western Australia compares to Norway, I looked up some stats on this last night. So there are 24 Norways in Australia. So if we just took Norway and jigsaw puzzled it inside Australia, we would fit 24 in there. But there's only 5 times as many people in Australia. So even though we have 24 times as much space, Norway's not a heavily populated country as it is. We're even less heavily populated. We live basically just around the outside. I live in one of the most remote cities in the world. And I worked here for the first 10 years of my working life in this desert, digging rocks out of the ground. That was my job. I was a process engineer. That's my training, process engineering and science, chemistry. And I did that for a solid amount of time. And then I kind of ended up just sliding into these different roles. So when I first started, I was working in iron ore. And in the mining industry, there's different kinds of processing, right? You have the processing of the fun things like gold and rare earth minerals and stuff. And then you have the processing of iron ore, where you just take big rocks out of the ground and then you make them into smaller rocks, but not too small and definitely not too wet. And you put them on a ship and that's it. So as a person who is really excited about chemistry, that was kind of dull. And I ended up very quickly focusing more on the data, because the goal is move those rocks as fast as possible. And so I slid fairly rapidly into a data analyst role, and my job was to process huge data sets as quickly as possible so that the primary decision makers could decide where they were going to ship the rocks to, basically. It's not very complicated. It wasn't very interesting, but I did really like working with data. So then they were like, we need this data faster. And I was like, well, you can't have it faster because your database is in Excel. And if you've ever worked in a large organization, you'll know that the easiest way to look at how do I avoid my job becoming redundant is just look at the dumb ways that people are using Excel and then create software to fix them. And that is pretty much what happened. I said, we need this to actually be in a proper database. Can you build one? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, I could just do it in Access. And then they built me one. because no IT department wants to support an Access database. So they were like, the thing is that we actually need someone that understands all the data because we have no idea what you need. So they were like, how about you come and be the product owner for this project? And that's what I did for the last 18 months that I was working in the mining industry. I was working as a product owner, but they also really wanted to make sure that I understood fundamentally how database design works. So they put me through my SQL training. So now I was a process engineer that had worked as a data analyst, that had SQL training and worked as a product owner. And then I was like, all right, this is really fun. And they were like, too bad, this project's finished. Now you have to go back to being a process engineer and studying rocks. I was like, I don't want to do that. So I went and started my own freelance consultancy. And as part of that, I had to build a website and realized building websites was way more fun than rocks. So then I became a website developer. And when I became a web developer, I started where every web developer who has absolutely no training whatsoever starts, and that's in WordPress, so please don't hate me. But I did work with websites for a fair amount of time, and I still do help some of our customer support websites on the side. But eventually I ended up moving into software development, and now I co-run an agency with my husband. We predominantly deal with building custom software for NGOs and like social enterprises, and basically people who are doing really cool shit for the environment or the community or whatever, not getting paid very much money for it, which you might think is not a very profitable job, and you would be right. Which is why I have to get conferences to pay for my flights, so please invite me back again, NDC. I also teach part-time HTML and CSS and some database stuff for an organization. Amy, who you might have seen a couple of days ago, also teaches for them. It's called She Codes, and our goal is to get more women into software engineering in Australia. And then finally, I also am a certified UX researcher because I don't like sleeping very much. And I also thought, you know what, I actually miss science because we call ourselves software engineers, but anyone that saw Barry's talk the other day, you might have heard him say, you know, we say that we're scientists and we say that we're engineers, but actually we're kind of still sacrificing the goat. And that was a bit how I felt when I started working in development. I was like, where's the data? Because coming from engineering, everything is about making sure you've got numbers and stats to back it up. So what I discovered is that UX research is actually the way that we can get a lot of that data and make sure that we're making the right decisions at the right times. So, brings us to usability testing. And particularly, usability testing is a type of UX research. It's not the only type of UX research, but it is the most common type of something called qualitative UX research. And I've just told you about how important I think data and stats are. So why the hell am I talking about qualitative research? Well, first of all, what is the difference between quantitative and qualitative? Quantitative is basically, what do the stats say? What do the numbers say? How do we do a test, do an experiment, look at what the results of that are, and then work out what the best decision is based on whether or not the experiment said A or B or C, right? Qualitative, on the other hand, is less about the numbers and more about what did people do? What are the actual users doing? So we talk about these two different research methodologies, and you would think it might make sense that you get better, maybe more useful data out of quantitative studies, right? Because that's reproducible, yeah? But we don't use that, right? We do have stats and things. We use analytics and stuff like that, but what does analytics actually tell you? It tells you, is there a problem? It tells you that there is a problem, or that there isn't a problem, or that there might be a problem. It's a really good way of comparing, say, your website or your product against someone else's, doing things like benchmarking. But the reality is that if you're going to do a quantitative assessment on something, that you need a minimum, an absolute minimum of 20 people to get something that is actually statistically relevant. And you have to keep your study exactly the same the whole way through. Now, is any two users ever exactly the same the whole way through? No. And not even a single user is the same the two times that they use the product. Like, we've all been there where we've used a product, used a website for one thing, used the same website for a completely different thing, right? It's not realistic. So while quantitative assessments can be really good for helping you identify that there is a problem, and maybe they can tell you like 60% of the participants were able to do the thing. They can't tell you what stopped the other 40% of participants from doing the thing, right? So for this particular reason and for the cost that's involved with the quantitative assessments, they're not always the best thing to go to as sort of your first point of attack, right? Now, there are situations where they're really good, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. But how do we get the why? We get the why with qualitative assessments. So while they're not very good at saying nobody or 50% of people were able to complete this or 50% weren't, when we do a qualitative study, we're going into it going, this probably sucks somewhere, right? There's a bug somewhere in my system. I'm going to find out why there's a bug, what bug that is, and how I can fix it, right? Because I'm actually going to watch a user use my piece of software. And you might be like, well, that's obvious. Obviously, I'm going to do some user testing. Usability testing and user testing are not the same thing, right? User testing is putting your product in front of a user, watching them like this and being like, yeah? Yeah? Can you use it? Like, just click that button there. And then if you go up to here, and like, that's not usability testing. That's just showing someone your piece of software and being like, please like it, right? It's not useful to you. It's not giving you things that you can actually use. The other good thing about qualitative testing is that you can be really realistic. You can get them to use their own information, for example. So in a quantitative test, let's say we're trying to see whether someone can go through a checkout process. In a quantitative test, we would have to have them all use the same credit card details, the same first name, last name. And so we've got to have dummy data that everyone's using the same thing, because otherwise it's not giving us a realistic test. When we're doing a qualitative assessment, we get people to use their own data. So we find that, oh, actually, it turns out that when someone has an apostrophe in their last name, or like my friend Nethra, who I worked with, doesn't have a last name at all, and that was her legal name, actually, that's not going to work. What happens in a situation where someone doesn't have a legal name? These are the things that you're not going to pick up if you're just using dummy data. And then the ultimate, and the reason why qualitative testing is like the holy grail of UX research, is because do you know how many people you should do a usability test with? Not like how many people is the minimum or how many people is the maximum. How many people should you do a usability test with? Have a guess. As many as you can. 5. We have a winner. 5 is the number that you should be doing. It's actually 4 to 6, but 5, right? Because let's be real, it's easier to just say 5. And the reason for that is that if you do 5 or if you do 100, you're probably still only going to get the same results. After 5 usability tests, you've already picked up over 85% of the problems with your software. 85% only testing with 5 users. That's insane. So you should be doing it, right? So how do you do it? All right, well, before we move into how to do it, I just want to precursor this with, this is not a replacement for QA, right? Because QA is different from usability testing. QA people also don't necessarily make good user testers, right? They're not good at testing the things as a user, but they are great at running usability tests, right? It's not a should I do QA or should I do usability testing? You should do both. If you don't test your product eventually, then it's still going to get tested. You just won't be able to control it, and it'll be much more expensive to fix something when it starts to go wrong. All right, I really like the animations. They're fun, right? So how do we do a qualitative usability test? Well, it's a 5-step process, and probably one of the hardest ones for people to get started with, and the one that I get the most questions about, is actually participant recruitment. So I think it's really important to understand, and I will reiterate this several times over, you are not the user, right? It's a very common thing that we chant it. We literally chant this in UX training. You are not the user is a really important thing to remember. So here's a reason why you shouldn't get developers or QA people to be usability testers unless the product is actually targeted at developers, right? And even then, you should make sure that you are being cautious about who you're inviting to be a usability tester. Because if I say, hey, Amy, we're mates, can you test this thing for me? In her head, she's not thinking, can I find the thing that I'm trying to find? She's thinking, can I build a better website than Joe? And that's ultimately what is going through the head of someone who works in tech. They're focused on the tech. They're not focused on actually the product that you're developing and whether or not it's meeting their needs. So we're typically looking for users that don't have a lot of knowledge about tech or usability testing because they're going to be swayed and they're not going to give us realistic answers. They're not necessarily going to be answering the questions that we're looking for answers to otherwise. They're just going to be like telling us things that they think that we want to hear. So I do actually have my questionnaire that I use for our nonprofits. If you scan that QR code, and I also have a resources link at the end if you want it. But we actually predominantly are looking for people to test in the nonprofit space. And the good thing about that is that it's mostly free. It unfortunately is not free for you, probably, because unless you are also working with charities, you need to pay those people. And another one of the most common questions I get is, how much do I need to pay a usability tester? And the answer is, it depends, but somewhere around €100. Okay, hopefully that answers that question. But you want to make sure that those 5 people that you're paying are actually going to give you good results. So you want to make sure that they are similar in demographic to your users. You want to make sure that you're avoiding any red flags and things. So again, I mentioned we work predominantly in charity organizations, and a big part of what we do is with organizations that are supporting victims of family and domestic violence. Horrible topic, but it's very rewarding to work in that space. And one of the things that we actually have to look for is, are these people working in that space? Because there's a lot of language that's used in that particular domain that is maybe recognized by someone who works as a social worker, but isn't recognized by the average person. So if we're doing usability testing with them and we're trying to test something that is targeted at the general, just the random person that needs that particular tool, that's not going to give us useful information. It's really hard to ask someone how tech savvy they are, like how comfortable they are with technology. So don't lie, right? But put your hand up if you've ever in your life said, I'm not very good with computers, like I'm not very good with tech. Yeah, there's at least a handful of hands going up in the air right now. You're at a tech conference, right? And the thing is, I've said that unironically several times, probably this week, that I'm not very good with computers. And it's true when I compare myself to a bunch of the people in this room. But when I compare myself to the average person, I'm really good with computers. So how do we find out that kind of information? How do we learn whether or not someone is actually tech savvy? We have to be a little bit creative. So, for example, in our questionnaire, we don't ask, like, are you tech savvy? We say, how comfortable are you using, how do you regularly access the internet? So that is a great question to ask people because it gives you some insight, not just into what devices they're using, but how much they know about those devices. Because if someone just says, my phone, right, versus someone that says, my iPhone 13 Pro and my Surface laptop, blah, 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 and like, you know automatically that they are a lot more comfortable with technology. We also ask questions about which of the following tasks would you be comfortable helping someone do? And we give them things like installing a piece of software or updating an app on your phone or registering a domain name, right? And these things give us an idea of how comfortable someone is with technology. And consider asking questions that are specific to your industry as well. So, like, again, we work predominantly with charities, so we have a question on there about, like, do you volunteer or do you work with any charities? Because sometimes we do want those people and sometimes we don't. It could be a red flag for us. As I said, pay them, please. So once we've recruited our participants, then what do we do with them? We've got 5 people. We're happy that they are going to be fairly representative. The next step is to work out what it is that we're actually looking to test. So we have 2 sort of procedures here. We've got the research questions, and that's it's like our hypothesis, right? Remember, this is science. We have a hypothesis, and then we have our experiment. So our hypothesis is our research question. And these basically come in 4 categories, from fairly specific to really unspecific, right? So the first one is usability. Yes, a usability test tests usability. This must be shocking to you all. I know, I'm done, thank you. Usability tests what is easy or hard to do and why, right? That's it, that's what it tests. So it's the easiest one to get your head around. The next one is findability, and findability is a little bit trickier to test, but it's still pretty easy. And a great example of findability is like, think of any dashboard you've ever been on, right? There's always somewhere like a user settings, and that user settings often doesn't even have a label, right? It's just like a little cog or maybe a little person in a bubble, and that's where you do things like change your password or change your email or whatever. So maybe I want to test, can people find those user settings? Do they know where to find them? Or is it like Google Analytics? Have you ever looked for the settings in Google Analytics? I've been using it for like 10 years and I still can't remember when I'm clicking around where to find the Google Analytics cog. So findability tests are a weird one because we want to make sure that people can find a thing they know exists, but we don't want to tell them enough to give them hints about where it is. So you have to be a bit tricky with that one. I'll show you an example in a second. Then we have discoverability, and this is finding things we don't know exist, right? Are they going to find this cool new feature that's going to make their lives so much easier, or are they just going to do it the hard way because they're users? And the last one is engagement. And this is the one where I would say is probably the hardest to test using a usability test, and where I often would turn to a quantitative test instead, because often analytics is going to help you a lot more than a qualitative usability study when you're looking at things like engagement. But an example might be like, are people spending a lot of time browsing through different articles and sort of jumping from one to the other, or are they just in and out as fast as possible, right? It's a hard one to test for. So we've got our research questions, we've got our hypotheses, and then we want to actually test those. We need our experiments now. So how do we actually create an experiment? Now, it's really important that when we do this, that the language we use doesn't sway our users. So research tasks are basically what the user is being asked to do, and the way that we word that is super, 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 super important. So an example of a usability task might be sign up to a platform using a coupon code freebie, right? And maybe in this particular instance, to sign up to this platform, the button's actually become a member. So I could have said, become a member on the platform using the coupon code, but then they would have automatically been looking for the words become a member by using sign up instead, or maybe join if sign up is what's on my button, or sign up if join's on my button, or become a member if just think about it, about what is least likely to actually guide them to the answer, but still make it clear what the question is, what the thing is that you're asking them to do. And it takes a little bit of practice. It's not as easy as just being like, do the thing, because you want to make sure that you're actually getting realistic information from them. Findability. How do we find that user settings menu? Tell them to go and do something in that menu, because if I say find the user profile or find the user settings, then they're going to obviously be looking for something that is called settings or uses some kind of iconography that they're familiar with that represents settings. If I tell them, go change your email or go change your password, then they're going to automatically look for those settings they know exist, but we're not leading them there. Discoverability. So let's say that we've got our brand new version that's definitely not ChatGPT. And we want to give them something like, tell me where the geographical location of this particular photograph is from. And what we're actually testing there is, can they find that it is possible for them to upload an image, or did they try and describe the fjord in Norway? And lastly, we've got engagement. And as I said, you kind of can do engagement ones, but it's really hard. And if you are mainly testing for engagement, I would encourage you to consider analytics instead. So just to give you a little bit of evidence around why it's so important and the way that you word your tasks, I would like you all right now to tell me, can you estimate the wealth of the people in this picture? Have we had long enough? Your eyes probably went something like this, because they were looking at the clothing, they were looking at the furniture. But if I asked you how old are the people in this picture, your eyes are going to go something like this, right? And that's because typically when we're looking at how old someone is, our default is to go to their faces. So if you ask someone to become a member and your button is called Become a Member, obviously that's where they're going to look. If you ask for someone to look for a user profile, then that's where they're going to look. So it is really important the way that we phrase these, and sometimes we have to be tricky about it. The good thing is that that also means we can often combine a lot of these tasks. So for example, change your email might also be a usability task. That might be something that we're testing. Is it easy for people to change their email? But we're also throwing in an extra hypothesis that we're testing about whether they can find the user settings there as well. So these are the golden rules for creating research tasks. If you're going to take photos of any of the slides, this is probably the most important one, other than the do's and don'ts that's a little bit later. But again, this stuff is all on the blog post that I'm going to share with you at the end. So if you just want to like continue your nap, that's also fine. So it is really important that you create good tasks, but I will say that the only good way of getting good at this is doing lots of it. And people are like, how do I get practice doing this? Because it's expensive. You've all got parents, I assume, or grandparents or aunties or uncles or, someone in your life who's kind of bad at technology. Find something that you can test with. It doesn't even need to be your own project, and do a usability test with them because they make excellent usability testers. They are definitely not prepped to know what they're supposed to be clicking on, right? So once we've got our research tasks, we need to actually facilitate the usability test. And this is the scariest part. It's not the hardest part. It's not the longest part, but it is the scariest part, right? And this is the do's and don'ts of facilitation. This is probably the hardest thing to actually stick to, because you can revise your tasks, but you only get one shot at a usability test. And you might have seen this GIF before. This is what it feels like, particularly if you're usability testing something that you created, because like trying to stay quiet while someone is like not clicking the button that they're hovering over that has the label of the thing that you need them to do is soul crushing, and it's really hard, right? But keep in mind that you are not the user. Right? So by doing these things, you're going to get the best possible results. Now, always record and always ask permission. We actually have like a disclaimer form that we get everyone that's doing a usability test to sign to say that we have permission to use the recording, and that they agree to everything, and that this is how much we're going to be paying them and all of that kind of stuff. Make it clear that you're testing the platform and not the person. There's no wrong answers. In fact, we don't even call it a task when we're talking to the actual user, the actual tester. We call it an activity, because then there's like no connotation of you did this right or you did this wrong. You kind of have to treat them a little bit like 10-year-olds and like, you're doing great, guys, okay? And then the other thing is we always want to make sure that we're sharing the tasks with people in writing. And this doesn't matter whether you're doing it online or whether you're doing it in person. You should always give them the task in writing, because you will be surprised how often people will actually go from doing the task to like, what was the task again? And they won't ask you if they don't have it written down. They'll just try and guess and pretend, and then they'll be flailing around, and you're like 10 minutes later, is there something wrong? Do you want to just leave it there? And they're like, I forgot what I was meant to be doing. And that's not a useful usability test. So you always want to be sharing it with them in writing. And it also helps if you've got users that are not speaking their first native language. So I really encourage you to test with people, particularly if you've got a global product that aren't, say, English first language, if your site is in English, or if it's not in English, in whatever other language people speak that are using your product, because it can be some of the most valuable testing that you'll get. Now, it's really hard to tell your boss or your colleague or the designer or the developer or whoever else is got a vested interest in the product that you're testing that they can't come. Like, you're not allowed, you're not invited I'll show you the recording later, because they're like, but what if I have questions? And you're like, well, you won't be able to ask them anyway, because that's not how a usability test works. The only person who should be speaking is the facilitator and the tester. And even then, the facilitator shouldn't be speaking more than they absolutely have to. You can imagine that's really hard for me, right? But you have to not talk to the participant while they're doing the activity. And if they talk to you, then, and often it's something like, what should I do here now? Or I think I need to click on this thing. There is some answers. We call this boomeranging. We say, what would you do if I wasn't here? Or what do you think you should do? So you answer them, but you don't really answer them, and you just kind of let them stew, right? And don't take it personally, because they're going to do this. And you need to be ready for it. But it's healthy, because if you don't constantly receive constructive criticism about things, then you don't keep changing and growing. So I strongly encourage you to test something you've made. I know, it's so good. I love it. Test something you've made, because it will make you a stronger person, and it will make you challenge your own ideas more often. This is my script, also on the website. You don't need to remember it. But I basically, I don't read it off, but I pretty much read it off. So instead of you reading it, here's a video I prepared earlier, and hopefully the audio is going to work. This was recorded with my friend Dee, so take note, I call it an activity and not a task. I turn my video off as soon as she starts the task. And lastly, this is a demo activity that I get her to do, which is a great way of familiarizing people with how the Think Aloud protocol works. And that's kind of the key to a usability test, is you need the user to actually speak out loud and tell you what they're thinking. Don't leave it until afterwards and then be like, why'd you do this thing? Because they're going to change their mind about why they did that thing between the time that they did it and the time that you ask them. They're going to be swayed by what the result was. Did they have a successful result? It probably was easy then, even if they struggled for 10 minutes to get there.
So I'm going to ask you to work on one activity at a time. And when you're doing the activity, go as far as you would if you were doing this on your own. And then when you complete the activity, say, like, I'm done, or I would stop here. And if you ever get to a point where you would leave the site and go somewhere else or do something other than use the website that we're testing, you can just stop there and let me know. At this point, I would go to, and then the name of the site that you would go to, or the action that you would take. For example, I would probably give up here and go and Google XYZ. Right? I'm also going to ask you to think out loud while we're doing the activities. And it really helps us if you can talk through your actions and what you're thinking and what your thought process is as we're going while you're using the site, rather than trying to remember it and then us dig that out of your head later. And it's going to feel super weird and uncomfortable as you're monologuing, but I promise it's going to be worth it, at least for us. So we'll do a test run and get you into the right mindset and make sure that you're comfortable with the process. And finally, it really helps us if we can see how people are using the website without prompt. So without any assistance. So I'm not going to say anything as you're doing the activities. And I promise I'm not going to be ignoring you. I will be taking notes in the background, and I might ask you some questions at the end about your experience. The only time that I will prompt you is if you are quiet for a bit. I might ask you what you're thinking or something like that. Do you have any questions before we get started?
No, I do not.
Okay, I'll get you to share your screen for me, Dee, and then to help you get into the think aloud mindset, I'm going to get you to do an example task that is just completely for fun. So I'm going to share the task in the chat for you, and I'd like you to first read it aloud for us, and then give it your best shot, making sure that you are talking aloud as you go. All right, let me pop this into the chat. Go for it.
So you'll notice here that I actually turn off my video at this point.
Google that will generate you some fun filler text that you can use as a placeholder when creating a visual design with large blocks of writing. Okay, so that sounds like I'm looking for a lorem ipsum generator. So I would open my search engine. Here's one I prepared earlier. And I would say lorem ipsum generator. Fun filler text, though, that sounds like I want something a little bit more interesting. So let's say novelty lorem ipsum generator. 15. So then I find another website that's got a list.
So you get the idea, and she came up with Pirate Ipsum, in case you're wondering. It's not my favorite. There are definitely some better lorem ipsums out there, but Pirate Ipsum's all right, so I'll let it slide. But you can see kind of how that process works and how it might feel a little bit uncomfortable for people, but also how that forced of like silence of you not saying anything makes them want to fill that space. So by doing a little demo test, and you're welcome to steal that one or your own version of it, I find that it's a really good way of just training them a little bit before letting them loose with your actual product. And it's also a bit fun, right? You can do something that kind of loosens them up a little bit and makes them feel a little bit less under pressure and being tested themselves. So after each test, we go through this little scorecard, and these questions might seem odd, but let me explain to you why we ask these specific 3 questions. And that's not to say you can't ask other questions, but do be careful about that as you go, because a question that you ask might actually change the way they approach a future task. So it's best to just try and keep the questions right until the end and encourage them to do that, speak aloud as they're going. So we first asked them how easy or difficult was it for you to do this activity, right? And you might think that that sounds very similar to the last question. How satisfied are you with doing the activity and the result that you got? Now, the one in the middle is actually probably the most important here, and that is, how confident are you in your answer? And really what we're actually looking for here is, was the problem our test or was the problem our software? Because often the way that you word the test might make sense to you, but in their heads, they thought they needed to do something different. So by asking these 3 questions, we can kind of get an idea for, was the issue actually that they couldn't find the button, or was the issue that they didn't know they were looking for the button? So we get all of these scorecards, but actually it's often these things that are written in the boxes that are the most useful, and then we iterate and we do it over and over again. And this is essentially what the sort of finished product of a round of usability testing looks like. So these are real examples taken from one of our customers. So yourtoolkit.com is an organization in Australia, and they're currently creating the first nationwide service directory for victims of family and domestic violence to get things like legal assistance and medical assistance and housing and all that kind of stuff. And we did a round of usability testing. We made sure that we had at least one person that was not English first language, because we know that immigrants are more likely to experience family and domestic violence statistically. We had one man doing it and 4 women doing it, because statistically women are more likely to be using a tool like this. We tried to follow all of those things. We made sure that they had a low-tech proficiency, because the chances are that someone with a low-tech proficiency is going to struggle more to use the website. As we went through, we did the scorecard for each of them, and we also took notes. We recorded it. I use a tool called fireflies.ai, which does a transcript, and then it will actually cut out stuff for me, and I can ask it questions. I strongly recommend this for speeding up this process. So people often ask, how can I use AI to improve my UX? There you go, that's a way. It can't replace users, but it can replace their virtual assistant sometimes. And then the goal is that we want to make sure every single one of these sticky notes contains either something a user said or something a user did. And we want to give context if we have to there, right? So we create a board on Miro. That's the tool that we use. You can use whatever the heck you want. It doesn't matter. You can even use just a whiteboard and sticky notes. But we do find that a couple of things really help with this process. So one of them is color coding the sticky notes based on the different user tests that we did. So if we had 5 users that we tested with, we have 5 different colors. And then what that allows us to do is, was it one particular user that had 5 different problems or 5 different pieces of feedback? Or was the feedback fairly widespread, and was it the same across all of the different users? So we color code them. We set it up with like columns. So we have a column for each interface. So it could be that we have the header. It could be that we have a sign-up page. It could be that we have a particular dashboard or something that people are using. It doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong here, but screenshots can be really helpful to provide context when you're actually looking back at this and trying to then provide advice to the people that need to make the changes of this is what people found and this is how we think you should fix it. And that's the bit that you still have to do because the users can't tell you that. They're notoriously terrible at telling you how to make your software better, but they can tell you what they find bad about it. So some of the actions that we actually took on this page from this round of usability testing, if you wanted to go check it out, you'd be able to see, although can you access it from outside Australia? You can? Okay, cool. For example, the search by keyword is the very first thing in that like search and filter bar, and the users were like, oh, it was the first thing there, so I thought it was compulsory. So we moved it to the end, so now it's got the service types and the prioritized services for, and then the search bar, and we also put an optional placeholder in there, and that seems to have really fixed that problem. People now know that they can just choose a service type and hit go. We improved the visibility of the scroll. It was something none of us had picked up, but they didn't realize that they could scroll down the full list and thought there were only 4 different service types, and there's like 11. And there were a bunch of other little sort of small things that we had. One of the most significant ones was actually that we called this find support services in the menu and no one could find support services, which seems like a bit of an oversight, and it was because they were all looking for the word directory. So we just changed it to support service directory, and now we've got much better click-through rates on it. So you can see how something like usability testing can give you really actionable insights on stuff. But if you take nothing else away from this talk today, hopefully you take away this very important reminder that you are not the user. You might sometimes be the user, but the chances are high that you are not the only or even the most important user. So do try and think about how you can build user testing or usability testing into your pipeline and how you can maybe approach it in a way that's a little bit more scientific than just like, do you like it? So if you would like to find me and heckle me anywhere online, here's where you can do it. I am no longer on the platform formerly known as Twitter. I mean, I think I probably am, but I'm never going to check it. So if you heckle me there, I won't be able to heckle you back, and that doesn't seem fair. But if you want to heckle me right now, you can scan this and ask a question, because I think we've got maybe like 5 minutes left. Let me just bring that up. So while anyone's typing in a question, I will answer this very important one that every Australian gets asked. And the answer is only on Fridays, because that's when we have after-work drinks and I don't want to drive home under the influence. So I was really hoping that there'd be another question pop up by the time I got through, do you ride a kangaroo to work? Who was it? Who asked it? Someone asked me yesterday, will you sing if I put it up on stage? And I was like, yeah, I will, but I'll get through all of the other questions first. What is my favorite lorem ipsum generator? I like the kitten ipsum one, like the cat ipsum. I don't know. I mean, I'm not very imaginative there. I just really like cats. So hopefully that one answers that question. What is my favorite rock is an excellent question. I'll have to think about it. I'll go back to that at the end. I sit on the, I don't know what that is. Oh, right, I sit in the pouch. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. What is my favorite rock? That's so hard. Do I like cane toads? Definitely not. Cane toads are the worst. They're really scary if you've never seen a cane toad, and they're like poisonous and they're just nasty. And they like eat all of our native animals. It's not pleasant. How did you come up with the fast exit button testing, or has it been there before? So this is actually something that we use. I'm glad someone actually asked a relevant question. Sorry I haven't answered the rock one yet. I'm still thinking about it. But the quick exit button is actually a really, it's kind of clever the way that it works, because the whole point is that we use this on websites where they are primarily for people who are victims of family domestic violence. And the idea is that if someone comes up to them while they're using the website and they need to like make it look like they weren't, that they can hit that button and it will be hard for someone to track where they were last. So it actually redirects them to Google, I think, or wherever we set it to go to. So we have like different sites have different ones. We've got some go to the weather, some go to the news, some go to the like Australia Post how to not get hacked page. It's actually a really good one because then they also learn how to not get hacked. So what it does is it redirects them to Google and then closes that tab and then opens a new tab all at once. So that if someone comes up to them and then says, hit the back button and show me what you were looking at, it doesn't actually show anything. So, or it will just go to Google. How do we discover that we needed that? Unfortunately, that one was through quantitative testing. We know that there are a lot of women in Australia who are victims of family domestic violence, and statistically, tech abuse is one of the main sort of ways that happens. So it is just sort of something that is the standard in that particular industry. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, what else have we got? How do I... Still got the rock, the cane toads. Love my hair, thank you. I also love my hair. Did I leave coal mining to allow me to work on a more fulfilling and ethical field? Absolutely. I say I bought my soul back. It was iron ore mining, not coal mining. I was never that evil, but I mean, it's still bad, but it's not quite coal. But it is definitely more rewarding working in development and particularly working with charities. So hopefully I'll have evened out by the time I die. What do I think is the most difficult thing with user testing? Staying quiet. Like I'm really bad at it at the best of times, but when someone's using something and I think I can help, like that's the hardest part is when you're like, oh, I could just give them the answer, but you can't, you have to shut up. If your product has different user personas, do you run separate testing processes for each persona or mix and match? It depends what level your project is at and what your budget is. If you don't have a high budget, mix and match. If you do have a high budget, do iterative testing, but it also depends on whether it's the same part of the product that has the same user, like the different user personas. So often with like the charitable stuff, we have a user persona for say a member of a collective giving circle and then an administrator of the grant pool that is is managing that collective giving circle. And their different user personas have very different roles and very different things that they're going to do on their product. So we would not do the same round of user testing for those two things because our tasks would be different. And while we can change our tasks as we go, we don't want to have them like super, super different. Am I at the end? Is doing usability, engagement, findability, and discoverability testing with the same user in one session a good idea? You can definitely mix and match. You don't have to do just one type of usability testing. You can sort of combine them all together and often will, because what you'll often find is that you will sort of do a usability test that also helps you with one of your findability research questions. How to record a test when you're in the same location. I still want to see their expressions and what they do on the screen. Just any screen recording software is fine for that. Question that no one asked, but I do often get asked is how do I test on mobile? And the answer for that is WhatsApp, because you can actually screen record in WhatsApp and screen share in WhatsApp, which most people don't know, but that is a really handy way of doing it. And most people have actually got WhatsApp installed already. It's fairly common worldwide. What if the feedback of some users contradicts the feedback of others? Keep testing, do another round of like iterative testing or split test it and look at something quantitative. Top questions hiding on, oh, Jesus Christ. I've created a monster. All right. What if the first user can't fulfill the task? Should we stop the tests with the other 4? Rewrite the task and then approach it in a different way. You've still got 4 users you can get great results from. How to usability test B2B? How can you find testers when they're further away or difficult to reach? There's actually platforms where you can recruit people. So there are like usability testing recruitment platforms that you can use. And they are very good, especially if you need like a global audience or something like that. Most people now are just doing like digital remote recording. So it's actually quite uncommon now unless it's a physical product. to be doing in-person testing because it's way more expensive and way harder to like videotape people's expressions than it is to just have them have a webcam on. And I think I've got most of them, and I think I'm also probably out of time.
The question is asking about like if they're hard to get hold of, not physically far away, like if they're users who are buried deep within some sort of enterprise business.
Sure. Okay. So just to reiterate, Eli's question was she thinks the question was like, what if they're like buried in an enterprise business? And this is a really good question because often like the users, and a really common problem that people will have is that they're actually not allowed to test with their mum. So they have to test with someone that's internal to the organization because, say, it's a product that is, for security reasons, only available inside an enterprise. And usually what I would say there is try and find someone in the enterprise who understands enough to be able to do the tests with, but doesn't use that as their everyday job. So an example might be, like, let's say that you've got an HR piece of software. You might test that with the like one of the receptionists or something, rather than actually going directly to the HR team and getting them to test it. If you wanted to find out sort of like how easy or hard was it to use from someone that didn't have too much domain knowledge, it's tricky, but usually I would say like try and recruit internally if you can. And the further away they are from the team that built it is probably safer. But you can't always do that. Like sometimes the thing that you're building is just an API. And so your usability test is giving that thing to a front-end developer and saying, build me a password reset page using the API that I've created you. So it really has to be kind of decided on a case-by-case basis. Hopefully that's answered the question. I do think I'm out of time though, and I'm sure that everyone wants to catch the lock note. So thank you for having me, NDC. I think we have enough people in here. Can you help me with something? It's a tradition I've done at every single place I spoke at since I first started conference speaking, but it might be like the extreme version of it here. So this is just to make sure you're still awake for the line breakers tonight. So are you, like, can we do it? Do you mind helping me out here?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, cool. I've got one yes. That's all I needed. Normally I have a very sort of specific way I do this, and we're going to have to maybe alter it slightly so that people don't die. But can everyone just put one or both hands in the air for me? So we're gonna try that once again because it was kind of bad. So like just everyone put your hand on 3. 1, 2, 3, hands up. Perfect. Okay. Now I want everyone to, on 3, stand up for me and then sit down. But because this is chaos, like what is this situation here? It's okay to hold on to something if you want to, or you can even just kind of bounce up and bounce back down, right? But we're going to give it a shot. So on 3, I want everyone to stand up and sit down. 1, on 3. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Hey.
All right. That was pretty good. Now we're going to put them together. So I want you to stand up and put your hands in the air. Okay. So if you could just go on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's perfect. Now, hopefully you've figured out where this is going already. We're going to go from this side. So lady in the glorious pink dress who we exchanged I like your dresses earlier today. Does it have pockets? Mine neither. I know it's sad. So we're going to go from here. We're going to go this way. You have the hardest job, man up there in the blue shirt, because your job is that you have to stay standing and like just nudge the people that side if they don't go back again, right? Because you have to go this way and then back this way, all right? Are we up for it? Yep. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Go, 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 go. And back. Oh, see, they always... It was all right. It was all right. Thank you very much for having me, NDC. Hopefully I'll see you next year.